Thank you, Paul. We feel so lucky to have you.
No, thanks for having me in this beautiful setting.
It's amazing,
It's hard
right?
to look this way when you have this view. Tough to concentrate. So this is the result of ESG.
Too much skiing, maybe?
Especially dangerous skiing.
I cannot cross my legs like you. Okay. But anyway, thank you for being here. As you are, for me, the true rock star of impact. So thank you for sharing your experience. And I don't know how many of you have already read the book of Paul, Net Positive.
That's more hands than we sold copies. A little bit suspicious.
So maybe can you share with us, Paul, a little bit about your theory of change about net positive, but what does it really take to be a net positive board?
Yeah, so we can talk that a little bit. The reason we wrote the book, by the way, and it still is the second best-selling book for Harvard, and we were number 3 on the Thinkers 50, so it really resonates with people very practically. What we wanted to achieve is a mindset change, and I think it's the same for boards, if I may keep it simple. Most people are in the CSR space, and you see that here as well. It's really about the way we look at solutions is to be less bad. You know, I want to emit less carbon. I want to cut down less trees. I want to put less plastics in the ocean. But the reality is, if you look at Johan Rockström's 9 planetary boundaries, 6 we've already passed. We're on the way to passing 8 of them. We're well beyond the thing to do less bad. We really need to start thinking regenerative, restorative, reparative. That's the essence of the book, and that's really what we need to think about. I always, it's probably not a good comparison, but I used to murder 10 people, I'm a good murderer. Now I only murder 5 people, I'm not a better murderer. So you need to really have companies think about how can they improve the state of the world. And in the book, we just ask ourselves 2 very simple questions. How can you profit from solving the world's problems, not creating them? And is the world better off because your company is in it or not? Now you go to boards very quickly. The way that we measure, most of the boards, 95% of the boards now issue sustainability reports. Everybody uses the word, you know, it's like we put .com behind it, we put AI behind it, now you put sustainability behind it, and you're sort of in fashion. But if you look at those reports and the way we judge boards right now, it's basically around, do you have a board committee on sustainability? Do you issue a sustainability report? Sometimes, if you're lucky, which is the case for about 15% of CEOs, is compensation one way or another linked to ESG. But these are measures really that have, you know, have run out of its time.
This is kind of hygiene, no?
It's less than hygiene, in my opinion, on where we are today. So what you really need is boards that understand that they need to be proactive versus reactive, that they need to think regenerative versus just being simply less bad. And that takes courage. It takes a different board, and we just don't have enough of those at the moment.
So how do you make this shift happen? How do you make a board become more proactive?
Well, first and most importantly, you have to get the right board members. You have to spend really a lot of time on that. When I came to Unilever, we had a board that was, I was explained that was very diverse. We had 6 white guys from the Netherlands and 6 white guys from the UK, and boy, could they disagree. So the definition of diversity was kind of narrowly defined. And so the first thing I did was really ensure that was my only request, really, that we get a new board there. Not that these people were bad, but they had grown up in a different time, you know. So get a board there that better reflected the strategy of what we were going to execute. So we ended up being the first fully diverse board. We had 2 people from Africa, 2 people from the Far East, the first black woman that went to Harvard, and all the other things. So it was a very diverse board, and the richness was in its diversity. But we also recognize, and that is for most companies the case, is that you're on a path that nobody else has been on. Any company now that is on the leading edge, which is the right place to be, I would argue, is really trotting a path that nobody else has done. And for board members, that's equally unsettling. So finding the right board members that have passion, that reflect the knowledge that you need, that have a certain level of diversity is even more important now than ever. And it's a good thing that about 46% of the new board appointments in the US and Europe now are people of diversity or people of color. And so the changes are starting to happen, but it's still at a scale that is way below what we actually need.
So it's started by people, and then how do you make the board effective? As we had the conversation downstairs with some board members, how do you make it effective to really move the needle, especially in your experience with the pioneer boards?
Yeah. So the challenge is that most boards, I'm on 3 boards myself right now, and that's the maximum I can handle with all the other things I'm working on. But it's hard, you know, the way that compliance is thrown at you, the way that the economy puts challenges on companies, the way that technology is evolving and disrupting every business model that you look at, takes a lot of time from boards. And most of these boards will say we're in the reactive mode, you know. We're spending a lot of time on things that are forced upon us to do that. And they don't have the breathing room to do what really counts. Obviously, boards need to look at the financials of a company, succession, risk management, these things always stay. But increasingly what is important is how do you embed sustainability at the core of your organization? How do you think about the world around you and move from the single-minded focus, which still most boards are on, of the shareholder to the multiple stakeholders? How do you get into deeper understanding of companies' cultures and what type of CEOs you need as to run these companies? So these fundamental questions are often, we don't have time to really treat them at the board level. So you need to create time. It's very important what committees and what work you do in committees and how you spend your time together and where you spend your time on, like on anything else. So at Unilever, for example, we really limited the compulsory parts to an hour and a half, 2 hours. Made the board meetings 2 days instead of 1 day. But then the brilliant thing was, I think, if I look back, was that things were going so fast that we had to educate ourselves. So I thought we might as well educate ourselves at the same time as we educate the board. So then you're on the same journey. So we offered the board these learning sessions the day before the board meetings. And we said it's obviously not compulsory. You can come if you want to or not. And we would talk in those times, the discussions might seem obvious now, but we would talk circularity, we would talk human rights, we would talk sustainable development goals. We could take any of these topics and really dive deeper into it. And what we found was 100% attendance all the time, because people like to educate themselves and grow and be curious and be part of that. So this joint development of a board is very important. The average age of a board right now is 63 years old. There's nothing wrong with that. You have to be 80 nowadays to be elected president. but the average age is, and 1 in 5 board members is above 75 years old. So these are wonderful people without any doubt, but they grew up in a different time, you know. They got tested under different challenges than what is needed now. So you need to change that. And, you know, you still have more than half the board that thinks that everybody thinks sustainability is important because it's a bad thing to say it's not important. But if you actually look at the boards, less than half really discuss how it affects the strategy of the board. So the first thing you really have to do is get people that are reflective of society, that understand some of these have some of these domain knowledge, be it AI, be it sustainability, be it climate change. And there are very few right now on boards that are really up to that level, if I may be honest.
I'm impressed. I didn't know actually that you brought the day before your board members to really learn and take them on this learning journey together. I have another question also. I'm curious about understanding also, because you always say that it needs to be part of your strategy, of your question, etc. Does it mean that you didn't delegate, if I may say, the board didn't delegate sustainability to a specific committee? It was part of the core of the board agenda, or how did it work?
Yeah, even in the company itself, I already felt from the start that if it becomes your strategy, then it becomes everybody's responsibility. So whilst you might have a small sustainability department that is more of an enabling department, and there might be some corporate issues that you want to deal with, you know, you probably want one strategy on human rights. in your value chain. You probably want one strategy coordinated on working with governments and government relations. So there are some things that you might put in a corporate shell if you want to, but we never, and Unilever never had more than 15, 20 people working in that department. And that was basically focused, by the way, on creating these broader partnerships to make things happen. So how could we work effectively, let's say, on sanitation with USAID or the Gates Foundation or DFID or other things. So we did that part corporately, but very much embedded into the business units, embedded into the strategy is absolutely important. So for the board, I think we have discovered, I think the boards that are a little bit ahead of others, that a separate sustainable or sustainability or corporate reputation, usually they go together. Usually they put you know, the issues of compensation and remuneration in that same committee. Otherwise, they don't have anything to do because we don't talk so much about sustainability yet. So they put it all together in sort of a committee and really don't bother us, keep the issues away from the board. Is not really the right approach. So in every committee that you have, you need to embed that. I would argue, actually, if you're in the finance committee, I chair some of the audit committees in different foundations I'm in and one board. That's probably smack in the middle if you don't think about climate risk, for example, now, or risks of human rights violations in your value chain. You know, you're not doing your job anymore, even as a finance person on the board.
Based on your experience also, when you shift purpose into practice, when you bring it to core, we understand, based on what you just explained, that it's all about the right people, the learning journey altogether. Anything that you can share with us from your experience where you have seen your board or another board where you have contributed shifting, where you have seen this shift happen based on also this collective mindset? Any specific moment that you would like to share with us?
Well, I'm a very tactile person, so I never liked to be in the office. I probably was only 15, 20% in the office because I figured out a long time ago that the consumers or the citizens of the world that we were trying to deal with were not living in my office, so it's better to take them out. And it's a very important thing to do the same with the board. We only had one board meeting, which was the AGM, the official one, if you want to, that we would have in the office, and the rest we really had in different places in the world. So bringing the board to what you're trying to do, showing them what the impacts of your brands are, bringing them to the other stakeholders. You know, they're all familiar with the shareholders. And even boards now, we have to be careful, even boards that say we have multi-stakeholder models, that as soon as the pressure is there, including in the company I was running, as soon as the pressure is there, they tend to gravitate back towards the shareholder. So you have to work hard, I think, very hard on board members to make them understand that it's these multiple stakeholders actually that, you know, that make the company's success longer term. And that's not easily understood. We have more data now that would support us if we would look at it and bother understanding it, but it's still not well understood by most of them. You know, you look at an example of Boeing, it's an outright tragedy. In fact, what is a bigger tragedy, I saw yesterday on one of these channels, someone sent me some piece of information that some people of certain political color in the US are convinced that Boeing went off the rails because they spent too much time on D&I. And that sustainability had become a word within the company. And this was a plot sponsored by China to be sure that the US airline industry would be in decline whilst other parts of the world would benefit. So those are the type of elements you're up against in some of these things. But you look at the Boeing case, it's an outright tragedy of talking the talk but not walking the walk. And the same would be for GE or Wells Fargo or many others. The graveyard of dinosaurs is full of companies that were just catering to the shareholder and on. So the other thing that's important is that you make the board part of a strategy to attract the right shareholders. I've always felt that with the tenure of CEOs now less than 5 years, most of them tend to dance to the tunes of the current shareholders. I find that very dangerous because if you change your strategies, it's very important that you look at shareholders that support your strategy. And because the rest is a financial game. They're so far removed from the actual company, they've become not shareholders. Frankly, they've become speculators. So
how do you make the board come your way? I mean, come your way and embrace this journey and invite the relevant shareholder. That's not an easy one.
No, it's not an easy one, but a very rewarding one if you could do that. I think when we got this attack from Kraft Heinz, for example, which was purely driven by shareholder primacy focus and greed, to be honest, didn't make any strategic sense. The board felt more comfortable because of the right support that they got or that they felt from a changed shareholder base. It took us about 5 years to show that our top 10 shareholders had actually significantly increased their holdings. The top 100 shareholders had doubled the holdings in the company. And we were actively not only working our relationships with them, but actually actively seeking them, paid off, in my opinion.
There was a point that was discussed actually in the discussion with the board members previously, that it's quite challenging to be on the market and to drive a sustainable business or sustainability at the core of business versus in family-owned business or in a more stabilized governance. Can you elaborate on that?
It's not actually true. If you look at family businesses, are they more sustainable or less sustainable than publicly traded companies? There's no real evidence. Despite the interest that you might expect from family-owned companies that they want to preserve their capital. And yes, they do intend to invest more in capital spend, for example, than publicly traded companies. But the disclosure requirements of publicly traded companies are significantly higher than private. And there is something about disclosure that drives behavior. You just don't want to be publicly called out. So you actually see quite a lot of public companies setting the pace versus private companies. They tend to be a little smaller, perhaps with a few exceptions, and they tend to stay under the radar screen. Like in any of these stories, there are exceptions on both sides of that equation. But broadly, I would not say privately owned companies, because they don't have the pressure of the shareholders, are able to behave better. No, it's not the case. The other thing is a misconception about the shareholders. There's this misconception that all the problems that we have is because of this short-termism and shareholder primacy. There is a big enough group in the shareholder base that actually thinks quite differently. There are many of the pension funds and institutional investors that understand that they need a decent return to guarantee a retirement of the people that they represent. But they also understand that that needs to happen in a world that they can retire in. And some of these funds have become so big, like BlackRock, for example, or State Street, Fidelity, Vanguard, the Japanese investment fund that Hero used to run. They've become so big that actually stock picking doesn't make sense for them anymore. Their main interest is to be sure that these overall economies work. So they've become your biggest allies if you really spend time with them.
We see we have a lady from Bloomberg also afterwards, so we'll have more interest in that. And maybe because it's us and you are all about, you know, courageous leadership, driving, being the pioneer in business as a force for good. What does it really take as a leader, as a board member, to move the needle?
So you look at the characteristics of what we would call a net positive company, and our subtitle of the book is How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take. But a courageous company is made up of courageous leaders, and the board is part of that leadership in the broader sense. So these are people that understand it's better, as I always say, it's better to make the dust than eat the dust. So these are people that see the writing on the wall, they see what's happening, and they want to be leaders in positioning their companies for a future that is more desirable, more equitable, more sustainable. And so these are leaders that understand that they have to take responsibility for their total impact in the world. It's very painful. It's like going to the dentist if you talk in some companies scope 3, or, you know, you saw Texas the other day had the World Petrol Conference of demons now nearly, but all of them made statements that scope 3 is not their responsibility, and yet you know that 80–90% of the emissions are there. So courageous board members say, what's our total impact in the world and what should we do about that? Courageous board members will discuss what the targets are that need to be set based on science, not just targets that they can get away with. 80–90% of companies actually play not to lose versus playing to win. There are very few companies still today that really have made the science-based targets, the 2030 targets, and everybody sort of talks about 2050 as if when 2050 comes, all companies all of a sudden will be net zero. I mean, it's a ridiculous idea even. So why not, depends on the industry you're in, be a little bit more progressive and think about them. They are people that think about the planetary boundaries, not only climate change or, you know. I talk to a lot of boards. We've set up this Valuable 500 with Caroline Casey, which I chair, which basically tries to get companies to take on more people with disability. 1.3 billion people in the world, 15% of the world's population has disabilities, but very few are represented at board level. I talk to some of the best and brightest CEOs and they say, no, this is the year of George Floyd, I need to fix this racial thing. Or I still am working on this diversity stuff. I don't know what it really is, but I'm still working it. So I can't do all these things at the same time. So if you don't look at it holistically, I think you will always be sub-optimizing. So net positive boards, full responsibility of their total impact, targets in line with science, understanding the importance of the multiple stakeholders versus only the shareholders, forging the broader partnerships. I mean, that's what you see here now at ChangeNOW, that these issues are now at such an extent that we need to solve them with broader partnerships, and they're willing to expose themselves to a certain extent to embark on these partnerships. And then if you go to the highest level of net positive, are actually companies that actively are still willing to work with NGOs, civil society, governments to drive the broader systems changes. Only 6% of the CEOs in the US go to Washington. I understand that. You have to, if you're suicidal, don't go to Brussels or Washington. But only 6% go. And the ones that go are actually going to what I call lobby. You know, there's $3.5 billion of lobbying in the US from businesses to just try to get the laws written in their advantage. And it's happening as we sit here. Or if they're even more chicken, they use their trade associations to do the work for them. But what about positive advocacy? What about going together like we did with the nature law or the circular economy law or the Green Deal? You know, not that I'm different than others, but I never go to Brussels to ask something. If I ask something, I ask, how can I help? But never ask something for my company. Because we should just focus on being sure that we create the right economies to thrive in and for our companies to compete in. And that's probably a bigger thing than our own small self-interest.
How can we help? How can we serve? So maybe given your insights about what it takes really to be a net positive board, a question to you is, how confident are you in the board ability to become net positive? How confident are you for board to make that shift?
Well, it's not easy to make that shift, so we should just recognize that. There's a lot of pressure on the boards, and there's a lot of hurdles out there. You know, the political will is missing right now. Some technologies are missing. Then there are pushback that are enormous around ESG that has become you know, politically hijacked, if you want to. Some of the changes that need to happen, the citizens of this world are not yet fully ready for it. So, but a good board is able to deal with those uncertainties. A good board is able to look at these trade-offs. A good board is able to make decisions on these most important areas, especially when it concerns the future of humanity. So it's not that they make the right or wrong decisions, because you never know without the benefit of hindsight. It's not that there aren't any trade-offs and choices to be made. The most important thing is that you're willing to embark on that journey and have these discussions and have a board that is diversified enough to bring the different perspectives there. And in that sense, we're seeing improvements, but we're far, the statistics show that we're far from where we need to be. There's no question about it. The boards, I think right now still, and I have to be careful how I express it with my Dutch directness, but I think there are more boards that are holding back this transition than accelerating this transition. And that's not a good thing.
So one call to action to this amazing crowd of change makers with numerous of them being board members. What would be your call to action?
My call to action is if you don't believe in the acceleration that needs to happen in your companies and want to play it safe, step aside and let someone else be on the boards, because we desperately need that. You know, we need younger people on the boards. We need broader representation on the boards. And boards are cushy things for many people. They sort of see that as a birthright after a brilliant career. And they're overpaid for the work they're doing. So I understand that, but we really need, the best thing you can do is step aside or become that courageous board member where you actively help these companies transform. Time to make the dust instead of eat the dust. That's how we started.
Paul.
Thank you.
Courage is the strength of heart, the fortitude that enables you to take the right decision in challenging moments. Thank you so much for being such a courageous leader.
Thank you.
Thank you.